to think because he doesn't quite fit the mold of a guy you can trust, especially as your wide receiver one. His extremely high production on such little amount of volume, normally that would scream regression. And I remember having a conversation with Nick before making our wide receiver bust list, and we were talking about Hill. It's impossible not to look at every category and just agree that there could be some regression, and most sane people would think regression is incoming. The reasons being his production being mainly on big plays, like I said, the lack of total targets, and especially being outside the top 100 in red zone targets. Even considering all that, we still believe that by halfway through the season, you are all going to be wishing that you drafted Tyreq Hill, because excluding the volume, everything else that we see on film and what he's been able to do consistently throughout his entire career tells us that this is not an outlier. This is just who he is. Last season, he was 7th in receiving yards, 7th in yards after catch, 7th in yards per route run, 9th in separation, 2nd in yards per target, and 9th in contested catch rate. So top 10 in all of these major categories. And I'm telling you, the list goes on and on. I could keep going with the amount of categories that he finished top 10 in, but for the sake of time in this video, I think you just should take my word for it. He may have finished outside of the top 20 in targets, but he still managed to catch 7 touchdowns, and that's something you can continue to see because every target for Tyreq Hill is a red zone target. Before you get on my case, I don't mean that literally, but figuratively, because every target that he gets has a legitimate chance to go to the house. Much more so than any other player in the league. How else could he have just 4 red zone targets and have 7 touchdowns? Dude's an absolute monster, especially in the deep game. He was 19th in deep targets, but 2nd in deep touchdowns. He also had the 2nd best deep target catch rate and didn't drop a single deep target the entire season. So what does that say? He can be trusted on deep throws, and who is the quarterback? It's Patrick Mahomes, which is a significant upgrade, especially when it's coming to the deep passing game. Alex Smith, he's not a deep passing quarterback, but he was top of the league last season, not because of his own ability, but because of these weapons. The weapons like Hill. Hill can not only take Patrick Mahomes' skill set, he can make Patrick Mahomes' big arm look even better. We haven't seen this type of combination of arm strength and speed in a long time, and the Hill-Mahomes pairing has the potential to be something extremely special, and you should all want a piece of it this season. And for those of you that think that Tyreq Hill is just a one-trick pony, that's just simply not true. They move him all around the field. He played 36% of his snaps from the slot and was still targeted on 20% of those slot snaps. So when they moved him into the slot, they had plans to use him. And in fact, out of all players that played in at least 175 slot snaps, Tyreq Hill ranked 17th in catch rate and 6th in yards per route run. So clearly, anywhere he plays from, he is a dominant force, and although he's not going to see a ton of targets, he's not going to need them either. He's still returning punts, he's still getting carries out of the backfield, and the Chiefs defense is going to be much worse this year than it has in previous seasons, which means this is going to have plenty of positive game scripts for Hill and Mahomes. They added Sammy Watkins, that's true, and typically we don't like to see too many quality weapons joining the team because that could take away some quality targets, but the reality is Tyreq Hill isn't a volume guy, so that's not going to impact him. More weapons should not be a concern to anyone. Believe us, after his rookie season, we thought regression was incoming, but after Hill just followed up his rookie season with another stellar season, just burning cornerbacks out there and making huge plays and really continuing to make a name for himself, the tape matched the production, and Tyreq Hill is what he is, and that is an absolute monster at the wide receiver position. So not only is he an extremely talented player, he has a young quarterback who has one of the strongest arms in the entire league, and their skill sets match up perfectly. You have a terrible defense, so how many of these positive factors can you put into one player and not see a completely monster season incoming? So for that reason, Tyreq Hill leads this list of players that you should have drafted. But moving on, we have Jamal Williams of the Green Bay Packers. So he's not a sexy pick, he's not a big name, and he's not an early draft pick. But what he is an insane value, and he's not really getting enough credit for what he did last season. He really burst onto the scene during the second half. He was one of those players that you were able to get off the waiver wire, and he led a lot of people into the championship game. Maybe some of those players that lost a running back. On the ground, he wasn't extremely efficient, but through his sheer volume and receiving ability, he was able to put up some really impressive numbers from weeks 10 on. He was 12th in rushing yards, averaging 75 rushing yards per game, 9th in receiving yards, 10th in yards after catch, 6th in yards per reception with just 0.3 yards per reception less than Kamara, and scored 5 times in 8 games, totaling 746 total yards. 8 games. That's half a season. It's not a small sample size. And when every major category is 12th or higher, This guy was a real dominating force. If you stretch out his 8-game sample throughout an entire 16-game season, he would have compiled 1,492 total yards to go along with 10 touchdowns. He was a PPR guy too. He would have had 42 receptions, which would average out to 15.7 fantasy points per game, which would have been good for a strong RB1 finish. Remember, this was on a team with Brett Hundley at the quarterback position. They just traded him. Brett Hundley, he didn't show us that much last season. He kind of sucked. So no defenses respected the passing game. Now imagine he has Aaron Rodgers back, which is going to open up a ton of opportunities for him to increase in the efficiency department. And I mentioned it earlier, that's something he really needs to work on. He was not an efficient runner last season. He looked weak on the ground, especially compared to Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones can't catch, and if you want to be on the field, you need to be versatile. On 18 targets, Aaron Jones turned them into just 9 receptions for 22 yards. That's hardly over 2 yards per reception. Compare that to Jamal Williams, who on 34 targets, Williams turned that into 25 receptions for 262 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not to mention Aaron Jones is suspended for the first 2 games, making this backfield Jamal Williams to lose. I know what you're all thinking, and that's that there's a third running back in town, Ty Montgomery. Yes, Montgomery is there, but Montgomery wasn't efficient on the ground either and is already dealing with a foot injury. There are certain players in the league that just can't stay healthy, and unfortunately, Ty Montgomery is one of those players. In preseason so far, Jamal Williams has been dominating all the first team snaps and has caught yet another receiving touchdown. And while Mike McCarthy has not necessarily named him as the starter yet, he's basically done everything else to indicate that that's the case, including saying Jamal Williams is poised for a big year. I know that could be translated to just some offseason hype, but we tend to agree with it. This is a good offense, a strong Green Bay Packers team, and they're going to be scoring a ton of points. Their defense is improved from last season, and he is going to get the first crack of the groundwork while being the primary receiver out of the backfield. It's a perfect storm for some RB1 upside, and from where he was going in drafts, I think a lot of people are going to regret not taking him there. The next player on this list is one of my personal favorites. I have not yet been able to draft him. I've been in 2 drafts so far and have not gotten him yet, but I have some more this weekend, and I'm looking to get him on some of my teams, and that's Marques Goodwin of the San Francisco 49ers. Goodwin has the potential to be a monster breakout this season. He's a favorite to lead this 49ers team in targets, a team that should be very strong on an offense led by one of the best offensive coaches in the league, Kyle Shanahan. And overall, there's just a ton to like about him, but I understand why not everybody is fully buying into the hype, because he's not a new receiver to the league. He has had several unsuccessful seasons, so typically it's hard to believe that he has the ability to break out. The issue with Goodwin though has never been his talent. I think it's more the situation he was in. He was on the Buffalo Bills, which has a very shoddy track record when it comes to receivers. We've seen almost every failed receiver that has come out of Buffalo be extremely productive on their other team. This is the same team that let Robert Woods and Chris Hogan go for absolutely nothing, and both receivers have made a serious impact on their new teams, and yet Buffalo keeps cycling through receiver after receiver after receiver. So are you really going to be blaming all of these receivers, or should you look into the organization? How is it that the Pittsburgh Steelers are able to take these young talented receivers and make the most out of them, and then you have teams like Buffalo who get these young talented receivers but don't know what to do with them, and then they go have success elsewhere? Production lies deeper than what you see at face value, and Goodwin himself, he's an elite athlete. Elite may actually be an understatement because he is an Olympic level athlete. He runs a 4.27 40, which is in the 100th percentile. He has an 81st percentile speed score, 96th percentile burst score, and 95th percentile agility score, to pair that up with a 90th percentile catch radius. So physically, he's gifted enough to be one of the best receivers in the league, and in the 5 games with Jimmy Garoppolo, he averaged incredible numbers. In fact, if those 5 games were stretched out to a 16-game season, he would have finished with 93 receptions for 1,229 receiving yards. For reference, Amari Cooper's best season was 83 receptions for 1,156 receiving yards. If we don't think that Goodwin has that type of upside, then we're completely kidding ourselves. One area he has struggled in, and I think it's more of a Jimmy Garoppolo thing, which we're hoping to see improvement from this year, is the touchdowns. Touchdowns can greatly impact a player's production. It could take him to a wide receiver 3 finish to a wide receiver 1 finish. So hopefully he gets that under control, but the bones of the player, the potential breakout, it's all there. So far this preseason, he's looked really great. He's already averaging getting 17 yards per reception, catching 7 of 10 passes for 119 yards. So that's right, 70% catch rate. And the only other real knock you have on him is that he's small. He comes in at 5'9", 183, but that's the exact same size as T.Y. Hilton, who has been among the fantasy elite for several seasons. And Hilton has actually, for a smaller guy, been quite the Iron Man. So even though if he was 1 inch shorter, he would be the size of Cole Beasley, that's not necessarily a death sentence for his fantasy value. I think a fair and conservative projection for him, if he plays all 16 games, would be to hit around 120 targets. And with his hands and his skill set, that being of a deep play guy, he could turn those into monstrous numbers if he hits the right side of variance. Of course, he comes with his fair share of risk, but this guy has immense upside, and God forbid if anything happens to Garcon and those target numbers increase, he could flirt with wide receiver 1 territory. And for those reasons, that's why we believe that Goodwin is going to be a player that you will wish you drafted. And before we get any further, let's talk about the giveaway. We're giving away a copy of Madden 19, and I absolutely love this game. It looks great. The graphics are incredible. PlayStation 4, Xbox, it doesn't matter. We'll get you a copy. All you have to do to enter to win is follow both Nick and I on Twitter and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It's really that simple. You will also get an extra entry into the giveaway if you have either entered the DraftKings deal, or if you enter it before we announce the winner, you will have an extra entry as well. And for those of you that don't know what the DraftKings deal is, we are giving away a free copy of our draft guide, including all of our in-season content for the entire season. And all you have to do to get that is to deposit $10 into DraftKings using the link in the description box below, and you gain immediate access to both of our Facebook groups for both season long and daily fantasy, our draft guide, which includes sleepers, targets, busts, projected target shares, player breakdowns on all players, risk ratings, strategies for every stage of the draft, and more. And all you have to do, follow the link, deposit your $10, and not only do you get all that, you get an extra entry into the giveaway. So now, moving on, we have Payton Barbour, and drafting Barbour is not going to seem like it's a high upside pick. It'll probably feel the opposite, and that's why in your home leagues, in your office leagues, Barbour's going to be a guy who's going to go late in drafts. In fact, in my home leagues that I did this past weekend, Ronald Jones went before him in each of the 2 drafts that I did, which to me makes absolutely no sense. Jones has shown us nothing to believe that he is going to be a threat to Barbour's touches. All Barbour has done has looked completely dominant in each of the preseason games thus far, and has been out-snapping Ronald Jones by an alarming rate. And I'm not talking total snaps, I'm talking snaps with the first team offense. Those are the things that you need to look for in the preseason. Meanwhile, Ronald Jones has already been criticized by the coaching staff for not only his inefficiencies, but his poor performance in the passing game. The fact that Jones has been struggling so much in that one area is incredible news for a player like Barbour, because don't forget, Charles Sims is out for the season. Previously, Sims was projected to be the primary pass catching back on this team, leaving the early down work to Barbour and Jones to split. Now, Barbour not only has a stranglehold on the early down work and the goal line work, he also has no competition for targets out of the backfield. His job is safe, and if you dive into the numbers and compare their production on the field, it doesn't even look like Jones is a threat to take over any of his work. The only way that could happen is if Jones just looks like a completely different player, because the player that we're looking at right now, he doesn't look like an early draft pick. He doesn't look like a draft pick at all. He looks like an undrafted player. So far, he's had 18 rushing attempts that have gone for a measly 18 yards, so a whopping 1 yard per carry. Meanwhile, Payton Barbour has rushed 15 times for 87 yards, averaging 5.8 yards per carry and reaching pay dirt on 2 separate occasions. Overall, Barbour is just a great pick. He's passed all the eye tests, and unfortunately, they're going to be on a team that's likely playing from behind throughout the season, which means the running backs could be game scripted out, but the opportunity share for Barbour is something that you just couldn't find at that stage of the draft. So even though he may not have felt like a good pick at the time, we really think a lot of people are going to be wishing that they took Barbour after just a few weeks of the regular season. The last player on this list is Emmanuel Sanders of the Denver Broncos, and it's no surprise, Sanders has been criminally underrated in each of the past few fantasy drafts, and this year is no different. Between him and Demarius, Sanders has always been the one that's been the better value in drafts. They always have similar production each year, but the only thing that separates themselves is about 2 to 3 to 4 rounds of draft capital. This season has been a little bit different than it was in previous years, because a lot of people were really slow to get on the hype train for Emmanuel Sanders, and a lot of it had to do with the amount of injuries that he had in 2017. He was still able to appear in the majority of the games, but he was never truly 100%, and not only that, the Broncos themselves had terrible play at the quarterback position, which also limited his opportunities last season. The result, 555 receiving yards to go with 2 touchdowns throughout 12 games. Now that's a terrible stat line for a receiver who is coming off of his 3rd consecutive 1,000 yard season. Regardless, just due to his past history, he deserves the benefit of the doubt, and so far this preseason season, he has looked great. As much as people don't like Keenum, he is a significant upgrade at the quarterback position now that they have moved away from Simeon and crew, and in comes Case Keenum. Keenum, as we know, made a Pro Bowl receiver out of Adam Thielen, who was a virtual nobody heading into last year's draft. And yes, Adam Thielen, he deserves a lot of credit, but the primary boost in production was due to Keenum's strength targeting Thielen's role, which was the slot. And I'm not saying he didn't play well when given the opportunity. What I am saying is that the slot role itself had a ton of value. Not all of that production was on his own. For reference, when Diggs was played as the primary slot receiver in 3 games last season, he amassed a whopping 331 yards and 3 touchdowns. In those same 3 games, when Thielen had to go outside, he just compiled 181 receiving yards with no touchdowns. So that just goes to show you, it was a lot of plug and play. Whichever receiver you put in the slot was more than likely going to have the stronger performance and get more targets. And what it tells you is how comfortable Keenum is at targeting this slot. The best part about that move is it looks like Emmanuel Sanders is going to be playing primarily out of the slot, which means he could be in for a monstrous season. Already this preseason, Sanders has the 8th most slot targets and has taken 64% of his total snaps from the slot, which is actually higher than Adam Thielen had all last season. If that trend does continue and Sanders can stay healthy, he has one of the safest floors out of all of the mid-round receivers. And even though he's been a bit boomer bust in previous seasons, this transition itself could cure that issue, and he would have the potential to finish inside the top 20. And for where he's going, I think everybody will be kicking themselves in the butt for not taking him. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for this video. If you did enjoy this video, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to sign up for the Madden giveaway. Follow both Nick and I on Twitter. Subscribe to the channel. You're automatically entered to win. We thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.